Come with me. Got something to say, might show about to wait. Think something new, deep inside of you. Something on your mind, something you want to find. Another path, another light, a peace in your sight. Come with me, out to sea. Raise the sail and feel a wind so free. Come with me, we'll plan to save. Take the time and you'll get what you need. Got a hungry mind. There is lots for us to find. 1,000 steps to take today. The signs point the way. There's a clock in the sky, above, below, by and by. Find the steps into the night. Many points of light. Come with me, out to sea. Face the sail and fail when so free. Come with me, we'll plan to save. Take the time and you'll get what you need. Come with me, out to sea. Raise the sail and feel when so free. Come with me, we'll plan to save. Take the time and you'll get what you need. Come with me to see the trace. Pick the fruit and taste history. Come with me, it's what can make an open mind can drink all the
You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McCroy. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're going to discuss the case for the Nazi saucers. I would be remiss to let the 75th anniversary of the Roswell event go by without touching on the UFO subject in some way, shape, or form. So tonight we're going to have a go at the case for Nazi saucers. What is involved with this and what kind of evidence is there for this thing? And you might be surprised to find out that there's actually a pretty good line of succession for many of these technologies in the field of physics here that are traceable back to human technologies, right? And this is one of those cases where it's said, and it's been reported, and there is evidence that the Nazis and the Germans pre-World War II and into World War II were developing saucer craft. So we're going to explore some of the evidence for this, and we're going to look specifically to two different researchers here to collate all of this information together. We're going to look primarily at a book by a gentleman named Henry Stevens, who was one of the major names back in the early days of ufology, who's studied many of these things. And we're also going to look at a book from David Hatcher Childress, who also put together some of the case evidence for many of these things and put together the data from earlier researchers, from some of the people that got a hold of this information. So what kind of information are we going to talk about here? So we're going to actually highlight that. And to do so, as far as the types of evidence being presented here, we're going to look in the book by Henry Stevens called Hitler's Flying Saucers, A Guide to German Flying Discs of the Second World War. And we're going to read about reliable sources. What sources did Henry Stevens collate this data from? And much of Henry Stevens' work was also cited by David Hatcher Childress in his book that we'll be exploring some of these avenues of thought too. And there's other researchers that were directly involved in uncovering much of this data that these guys will actually reference. And so we're going to talk about first here, what are these sources that Henry Stevens cites here and David Hatcher Childress? What are these sources? So let's read into Henry Stevens' book here. And he talks about, in Chapter 2 here, reliable sources. Much has recently been written concerning German flying discs. To the best of my knowledge, no single source has all the answers. To piece this puzzle together, information from various sources must be used. Of course, some sources are better than others. Categories of sources in a somewhat descending order of reliability are: Number 1, those actually involved with these projects. Number 2, witnesses of flying saucers who had prior knowledge that the sighting was of a German saucer as opposed to an unidentified flying object. Number 3, those who at the time had good reason to know of German saucers. Number 4, third-party intelligence sources which verify claims made by the higher categories above. Number 5, researchers who have interviewed principals involved in German saucer research. And number 6, studies or scientific papers published by individuals identified as participants in these projects. Sources without names are not as good as sources with names. Information, data, or pictures without a chain of evidence linking them to the event are not as good as those with proper documentation. After almost 60 years, nothing is going to be perfect. These categories are not meant to be absolute. Some sources fit into multiple categories. Some reports have value, even though they are not rigorous simply because they were later corroborated by other sources. When reading allegedly factual statements, the reader should always be looking for the source documentation for these statements. A writer's opinion or interpretation may be valuable, but it should always be made clear which is who. Examples of the first category are those who worked on German saucer projects. What we're going to explore here is there are absolutely, historically, and this is well documented, there are German saucer projects that have been acknowledged, right? These really happened, and some of these sources are going to be listed here. These are actual people who worked on some of these projects and have come forward with information, written books, putting out documentation, and provided photographs of the craft in operation. So this is not speculation, okay? Not purely. Now, some facets of this research, when you get to the nuts and bolts of it, some of the projects are not as easily historically provable as some of these other ones, but there still is a lot of evidence that they did take place. So let's read on here and see, as far as some of the sources here of this information, who Henry Stevens is talking about. So let's continue reading. Among these is Rudolf Schreiber. Schreiber was involved in a German saucers project which sometimes bears his name. As a source of information, he wrote an article on German saucers for the very respected Der Spiegel magazine. Likewise, Joseph Andreas Epp was a self-admitted consultant for both the Schriever-Habermal project at Prague and the Meath project in Dresden and Breslau. Mr. Epp wrote to me personally, and I'm going to pause that this is Henry Stevens speaking, and has written several articles and a book about German saucers before he died in 1997. An example of a witness who had prior knowledge of German saucers would be George Klein. Klein was an engineer, an eyewitness to a saucer liftoff on February 14, 1945. He was also a special commissioner in the Ministry of Arms Production who oversaw both the Schriever-Habermal and Meath-Beluzzo projects for Albert Speer. Mr. Klein has written some newspaper articles about these facts, such as his article in Welt am Stantag titled... and I'm going to skip the German here because I don't want to butcher the German, and I'll just read the English translation here. And the name of the article was The First Flying Disc Flew in Prague in 1945. Other newspaper references of Mr. Klein will be mentioned. He has also written under the pen name of George Sautier. Another example would be the unnamed eyewitness provided by researcher Horst Schupman and first reported in Karl-Heinz Zunich's book, and I'm not going to say the German here. I'll translate again to English because I don't want to butcher the German. Secret Technology, Wonder Weapons, and the Terrestrial Facts of the UFO Phenomenon. In this report, the informant relates a wartime experience in which he witnessed several small flying saucers in a hangar. George Lusar is an example of a source falling under Category 3. Lusar worked for the German Patent Office during World War II. He saw many secret patents as they came into his office. After the war, he wrote a book and some articles concerning this technology, which was taken by the Allies. Likewise, Italian engineer Renato Vesco worked with Germans while at a secret division of Fiat housed in an underground facility on Lake Garda, right in the middle of the proposed Alpenfestung. After the war, Vesco also researched British intelligence data. This data was voluminous. Of course, Vesco knew what to look for based upon what he had learned while working in a secret Axis underground facility. Vesco is an example of Category 3 and the next one, Category 4. Category 4 involves intelligence information obtained from government sources. This information mostly comes from the very entities who are trying to suppress this information. It should always be suspect. It should be used only to verify information obtained from higher sources, categories 1 through 3, or from governmental sources of another government. For instance, information concerning flying objects, which Renato Vesco called fireballs, was verified using information obtained from the U.S. government under laws forcing it to divulge some types of information, the Freedom of Information Act. Category 5 would include, for instance, Callum Coates, whom spent 3 years with mathematician and physicist Walter Schauberger, son of Victor Schauberger. Mr. Coates consequently learned a great deal of information concerning the ideas of Victor Schauberger. Mr. Coates is a scientist and architect. Coates wrote Living Energies about the ideas of Schauberger and his saucer models. In the same category, we find Michael X. Barton, who, through a translator, Karl F. Mayer, received information from an informant in German, Hermann Klaus, who claimed to have actually been involved with some of the German saucer projects. Klaas's peripheral knowledge, Category 3, also seems to have extended into other aspects of secret German research and technology. Barton wrote one of the earliest books on this topic, The German Saucer Story, in 1968. One unique source is Wilhelm Landig. Landig wrote 3 novels dealing with the Second World War. Following the title of each novel, Landig tells the reader that this is a novel based on realities. The reader is given to understand that the technology described was based on hard fact. Landig's works contain more than cold facts, however. Landig deals with a large variety of topics in his books. Sometimes, facts or opinions are stated, or stories behind the story are told. He writes unashamedly from the National Socialist perspective. Landig was obviously a Nazi and an intellectual insider. His history always remained unclear, at least to this writer, until his recent death. Because of his unclear background and the fact that he wrote in novel form, there has been a reluctance to ascribe full credibility to the statements he makes regarding the technology of the Third Reich. This all changed in 1999 as a result of research done by Margaret Chatwin with an organization called Information Service Against the Extreme Right. And this going to pause for a second there, folks. And this is actually a translation from German. I guess this is a German author who wrote this, but that's what it translates to. Information Service Against the Extreme Right. Coming in from this perspective, they certainly would not be accused of aggrandizing Landig's career. Some details of Landig's biography are now filled in. In that article, we learn that Landig, an Austrian, took part in the unsuccessful Vienna Putsch of 1934. Thereafter, he fled to Germany and was inducted into the SD, the SS, and the Waffen-SS. There he rose to the rank of Oberscharführer. Eventually, Landig was detailed to oversee government security concerns and given a position in the Reich's security department. Landig, in this position, was assigned to cover the security for the development of UFOs. It turns out that Landig was not only a source, but a great source concerning the development of German saucers. Turning to unnamed sources, they should never be given the weight as named sources are given. Many times, writers use unnamed sources to advance a radically new and fantastic hypothesis in the UFO world. This type of source may sound convincing, given the secret nature of the message, but they should only be accepted if they yield new information which can be verified independently. This goes double for unnamed government sources. Government has a history of manipulation of information concerning UFOs and UFO origin theories. One of the most famous was the Majestic 12 or MJ-12 affair, which was based on unnamed government sources. This house of cards finally fell apart, but the real issue before us is why this house of cards, the MJ-12 affair, was ever allowed so much attention in the first place. Government information should, therefore, never be used as the primary basis for a UFO hypothesis. Gonna repeat that sentence there, folks. Government information should therefore never be used as the primary basis for a UFO hypothesis. Nothing is truer than that statement. So, why would you trust the government for disclosure of these things? Obviously, they're complicit in covering up many of these technologies, and they have reasons for doing that. So they're not going to be genuine with you, right? They're disingenuous. So that's a groundbreaking statement there by Henry Stevens, and boy, is he correct or what? Let's continue reading. It should only be used to verify a hypothesis developed, ideally, from multiple independent sources. Concerning German saucers, this means that information or ideas from government sources might be checked using similar assertions given by official records of two different countries. Let's see. Okay, it should only be used to verify a hypothesis developed ideally from multiple independent sources. Concerning German saucers, this means that information or ideas from German sources might be checked using U.S. or British governmental archives, but not the reverse. similar assertions given by official records of two different countries is notable. If both United States and British or German governmental sources agree upon something, then something might be said of the assertion. Of course, there are those that say this only points to a conspiracy between the two governments to conceal a deeper truth. This may be true in some cases. These are all really judgment calls, which the reader will have to make for himself in the end. Regarding individual sources cited, an effort will be made to describe the type of evidence each cited reference uses when the information is available. All right, folks. So, gonna pause there for a moment, just so we understand these are the types of sources that are being referenced here, okay? There's a lot of corroboration on the part of many of these sources. So when you have guys like Henry Stevens and David Hatcher Childress here citing some of these other sources, these other people that have investigated this thoroughly, they're citing sources that have a little more than just hearsay to back them up. Okay, like I said, there's been document dumps and stuff that have come out with this, and information has come out from, people that were allegedly involved in this, that claim involvement in this, and were able to describe things that have been verified through other sources. And there's been photographs leaked and all kinds of things like that. So, when we see that going on, we could know that there's more to the story than just hearsay. At any rate, we were discussing sources. Okay, so Henry Stevens points out who exactly these sources are, right? Many of these sources. So let's get into the meat of the matter here. And we're going to read from David Hatcher Childress's book right now. And the title of this book is called Hanabu, The Secret Files, The Greatest UFO Secret of All Time, where this touches upon some of the different saucer projects. Some of the ones that, aren't necessarily officially acknowledged, but there's a lot of evidence to back it up. So let's read into it here. The mystery of the saucers actually began before World War II, but it was during this war and shortly afterwards that the phenomena of flying saucers, flying boomerangs, flying cigar-shaped objects, and more began to flood the skies of the world. What on earth was going on? Were we being invaded from another planet? According to the press and the military, no one knew for sure. Were there really UFOs in the skies? In later years, various skeptics and skeptical societies promoted the view that there weren't really unexplained flying machines in the sky. It was just the overactive imaginations of people in the years after World War II. Yet, is this really a good explanation for a large part of the UFO phenomena? Certainly not. Evidence does exist that craft from other planets are visiting the Earth. Gonna pause there. Okay, really? Maybe not. But that's David Hatcher Childress's opinion here that he put in here. But let's continue on. I don't want to get hung up on that. I don't necessarily agree with him. I don't think there's enough evidence to show that craft from other quote unquote planets are visiting the Earth, right? We do see that these craft exist and they've been spotted, and we don't know what they are. But there's no definitive way to prove his statement there. But let's continue on and see what he says next. Evidence also exists that the Germans were designing and building disc-type craft during World War II and perhaps before. There is actually evidence, and we're going to get into some of that evidence here. So although David Hatcher Childress also believes that there's evidence that, craft from other planets are visiting here, I don't see it the same way. I think the vast majority of what we see in the skies as physical nuts and bolts machines are actually man-made craft. Now, that's not to say that there's not other things going on up there in the sky, other unexplained phenomena that we see that can't be so easily explained away. There certainly is evidence of that, but we cannot prove definitively that these are quote-unquote aliens from another planet visiting us. There is a lot of evidence to correlate back to the whole Nazi saucer idea. So let's read on here. A document dump of German flying saucers. Since about 1990, researchers in Europe, Australia, America, and elsewhere have received documents that show the designs of German flying saucers. A number of curious photos of the craft, in flight and on the ground, have also surfaced. They arrived via a curious document dump involving a German living in London named Ralph Ettel. Ralph Ettel then teamed up with another German named Norbert Jürgen Rathofer, sometimes spelled a different way with a double T and sometimes only with one F, and sometimes with a hyphen between Jürgen and Rathofer. The two released a book circa 1989 titled UFO, The Third Reich Strikes Back, with a question mark. And this is translated from German. I'm not going to butcher the German. So I'll do you folks the favor of not butchering the German here and just read the English translations. This book published photos and plans of the Hanabu, Vril, and Andromeda craft. They went on to author and publish a second book in 1992 entitled The Vril Project, The Final Battle for Earth. That same year, they also released a 1-hour documentary film in German called UFO Secrets of the Third Reich. This film was released in Austria in 1992, but saw limited release. It was sold as a videotape, and it seems doubtful that it was ever shown on television in Austria, but may have been sold to television stations in other countries. These Hanabu and Vril documents were published again in 1996 in a German-language book called The Dark Side of the Moon by Brad Harris and published by Pandora Books in Germany. And I'm going to pause for a second there, folks. I've been looking for this book for a long time and I cannot find a copy of it translated to English. I have a very hard time even finding it in German, for that matter. So, keep your eyes open for this. If you happen across this book or find it somewhere, snatch it up and look for it because it might be something important. But let's continue on. This German language book purported to be the translation of an English book supposedly published a few years earlier. However, no such English book ever existed, and it would seem that Brad Harris is just a fake name for some German author, perhaps Norbert Jürgen Rathofer. The book contained a number of Hanabu and Vril documents, and I, the author here, going to pause, David Hatcher Childress, republished some of these illustrations in the updated version of my book, Man-Made UFOs. This was a clever way of bringing controversial documents out, in Germany no less, of the Hanabu and Vril craft that had been rumored for decades. Germany has strict laws concerning symbols and speech surrounding the Nazi era, and the swastika is banned from public use, including in magazines, books, and posters. Photos of the Hanabu or Vril craft do not have swastikas on them, allowing them to be viewed in Germany. When they have a symbol on them, it is the German cross. It was later said that the Hanabu and Vril craft had the Black Sun logo on them instead of the German cross. Austria does not have the same laws forbidding discussion or images of the Nazis, and this is the reason that the film UFO, The Third Reich, was released in Austria and not Germany. This movie can be found on the IMDb website, where we learn that the English language version, called UFO Secrets of the Third Reich, was released in Austria in 1998. The brief description says, "What did the Germans and Hitler know about the universe and UFOs?" This documentary unravels some of the mysterious knowledge that was present during the Third Reich. We are told that the two writers are Jürgen Rathofer of the screenplay and Ralph Ettel. We are also told that the documentary features Ernst Harmenstein, Wolfgang Pompel, Eugen Lardy, and a number of others. So clearly, Norbert Jürgen Rathofer and Ralph Ettel are behind the release of most of the Hanabu and Vril documents, but are they trustworthy? Who is behind this document dump? An English version of this documentary, released in Austria in 1996, had a narrator at the beginning announce that the material had come from the Austrian branch of the Knights Templar. Some have claimed that the material came from the Austrian branch of the Vril Society. Gonna pause there, folks. The Austrian branch of the Knights Templar. Who would that be? the Austrian branch of the Knights Templar. Well, the Knights Templar are a sub-organization of many of the secret society groups. They're most commonly associated with the Freemasons, but the Austrian branch thereof might rightfully be called the Illuminati. Right? If you want to get down to it, especially if they're saying this is a branch of the Vril Society, and all these different secret societies kind of overlap at different levels. So, the Vril Society was a secret society that operated within Nazi Germany during World War II and before, actually going back prior to World War II. So this was one of the major secret societies that held sway in seeking out the esoteric information associated a lot of the way with some of these exotic type aircraft, so to say, this saucer technology. So with that being the case, a lot of times they're credited with being the organization that held a lot of this knowledge and a lot of these different patents and different types of technology in its grasp. So let's read on, though. The American with the most knowledge of these documents is Henry Stevens. Going to pause there. That's the gentleman we were just citing from, who listed off the different sources of information that a lot of this stuff came from. A Californian researcher who has been studying the field of German flying discs and other secret technology for decades. Stevens has been in contact with several German researchers on this subject and is the author of a number of books, including Hitler's Flying Saucers, the one we just quoted from. In private correspondence, Stevens told me, I was suspicious of the Edel dump for years. I still am. It is just a little too good. What made me reappraise my position was the late Heiner Gehring, who was a straight-up no-BS guy. As I mentioned, he visited Landig, a former SS officer and author of fictional books on German saucers and secret bases, just before Landig died, and was shown Landig's files. Evidently, there was a lot Landig did not tell us in his novels. Heiner came away talking about the Vril and Hanabu saucers as if they were real. Then there is the Field Propulsion Saucer FBI report, the Gut-Alt-Glossen report, in my first book, Hitler's Flying Saucers, which fits the bill exactly. And I'm going to pause there, folks. Yes, there are FBI and CIA documents and other military intelligence organization documents verifying that there were secret saucer programs going on in Germany and some of the details thereof, as is pointed out here by Henry Stevens in this letter to David Hatcher Childress. Let's continue on, because we're reading here. This is the letter from Henry Stevens to David Hatcher Childress regarding this. I do not know that Heiner believed all of the Tempelhof-Gelschrift lore about the Hanabus, the mediums, the fight to other worlds, etc. I never doubt he believed this, and I certainly do not believe this. Nevertheless, he reported some of it, probably based on what he found with Landig. I'm going to pause for a moment there, folks. So what Henry Stevens is saying is there's a lot of lore that goes along with this, right? About these Hanabu craft and Vril craft that supposedly were developed, and that they flew to other worlds. Well, Henry Stevens doesn't believe that happened, but nevertheless, he believes that these craft were very real, right? So let's continue on. Heiner was my source as to the Edel dump. He explained to me, in themselves, Edel and Rathover are not credible sources in my eyes. Rathover was a security guard or janitor who claimed membership in this secret society. Edel was a filmmaker and wannabe big-time producer. Let me give you an example. Edel's production movie company filed bankruptcy in Germany. This is a very big deal in Germany. But Edel still wanted to make money on the films belonging to the company and had the master tapes. He sold the right to copy them to a guy in New Zealand or Australia. I found out about this, realized it is probably illegal, but my friend at the time, Wolf Leithart, a German living near me, wanted the rights too. They got together, and for $500, he bought the rights to UFO's Secrets of the Third Reich. But not the exclusive rights. So Edel was going around the world selling rights to this film that he made, but technically was part of a bankruptcy. And to this, Edel and Rathover had some sort of interest in a post-production company in Austria, one which could do digital images. We called that company we called that company at the time, and when the name of the first film or the names of Edel and Rathover were mentioned, people could not run away fast enough. Bulgarian-American researcher Vladimir Terziski was given a couple pictures of a Hanabu in negative form. Going to pause there, folks. This is important. Okay? Vladimir Terziski was given negatives of photos of these Hanabu craft. Okay? So this is a very important piece of evidence for these devices existing. Let's read on. This had great credibility in my mind, since I do not recall anyone faking a negative. I think these pictures were in my first book, Hitler's Flying Saucers. Vladimir visited both these guys with the Japanese UFO film crew. Vladimir went to college in Japan and spoke Japanese, but neither Edel or Rathover spoke English, so they found a local guy to translate to English for the visit. It was Jan van Helsing, the conspiracy writer, a.k.a. Udo Holey. About this time, I began to turn more and more to the people researching the Jonas Valley as better sources in Germany, as well as Friedrich George. These guys did not deny the Hanabu thing, but like me, tried to keep it at arm's distance. The only one who accepted the Hanabu narrative wholly was Dr. Axel Stoll, a geophysicist. I still do not know for sure anything about the whole Edel Rathover Hanabu thing. And that's the end of the first letter. And then in a second letter, Henry Stevens says to David Hatcher Childress, I forgot two things. Number one, Vesco's Kugelblitz ball lightning was a reference to the plasma nature of the Hanabu engine. I never made this point, but I should have done so. And number two, Michael X. Barton's German saucer story contained a description of the Hanabu. He listed several, maybe 8 or so, wonder weapons. One he called it the magnetic bottle, or the flying magnetic bottle. This was some sort of flying craft which sounds very Hanabu-like. So, let's continue on here. Now back to what David Hatcher Childress says here. He says, so Henry Stevens believes that the documents concerning the Hanabu, Vril, and Andromeda craft are authentic, though questions remain as to their origins. He doesn't think much of the men who released them. He mentions the Field Propulsion Saucer FBI report, which he calls the Gut-Alt-Glossen report, as something that convinced him that the Hanabu saucer had been built and used during the war and after. The Gut-Alt-Glossen report was actually 2 FBI reports from November 7th and 8th, 1957. It is from these reports, from the Freedom of Information Act, that reports of Hanabu craft in action can be learned. The recently released CIA reports are another. The FBI reports said that a witness saw a craft identical to a Hanabu at the German town of Gut-Alt-Glossen. Says Stevens, quote, the files in question are Gut-Alt-Glossen file numbers, and it lists off the file numbers, folks. I'm not going to read them because it's very long numbers. Their date is 11/7/57 to 11/8/57. They deal with a Polish immigrant, then living in the United States, who reported his wartime experience to the Bureau, hoping it might throw some light on UFO sightings seen in Texas about this time. And I'm going to pause there, folks. This is a famous report. Okay, this Texas report. These are the lights over Texas there. But let's read on. The time of the sighting was in 1944. The place was Gut-Alt-Glossen, approximately 30 miles east of Berlin. The informant, whose name has been deleted, states that while he was a prisoner of war working for the Germans, a flying object arose nearby from behind an enclosure hidden from view by a 50-foot-high tarpaulin-type wall. It rose about 500 feet, then moved away horizontally. The only noise the object made was a high-pitched whine. The object was described as being 75 to 100 feet in diameter and 14 feet high. It was composed of a dark gray stationary top and bottom sections 5 to 6 feet high, with a rapidly moving center section producing only a blur and extending the circumference of the vehicle. Notably, the engine of their farm tractor stalled during the event, and the SS guards told the driver not to attempt a restart until the whine could no longer be heard. Because of what I believe is their importance, these files have been reproduced here. One of the most compelling reasons for taking this report so seriously is that the government of the United States of America took this report so seriously. It is hard to believe that an agency such as the FBI would take and retain reports of flying saucers which had no special meaning for them. Add to this the fact that this report was over 10 years old at the time it was taken, and that it concerns a report originating in another country. The FBI operates within the USA and usually does not concern itself with foreign matters unless they have meaning for the internal security of the United States. Could the reason that this report was taken and retained for so many years be that it did, in fact, have meaning for the internal security of the United States? Did it have something to do with the flying saucers seen over Texas at the time, which also stopped motor vehicles? And then David Hatcher Childress has reproductions, photocopies, pictures of these documents shown here in his book. So these could be looked up online. You can actually read the reports yourself. They're out there. They could be found. As an alternative to the security issues, could there have been another reason that the FBI was so interested in flying saucers? Did the FBI desperately want information on UFOs, which was held by the military and other branches of the intelligence community, which was not shared with the FBI? It has been rumored that J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI at the time, was very interested in learning these secrets, but was held out of the loop. It could be that the FBI was already aware of German saucers through security clearances done on German scientists coming to the USA under Operation Paperclip. The ego of J. Edgar Hoover may have been a factor in the Bureau's quest to learn more on this subject. Hoover may have wanted to be on equal footing with other intelligence chiefs. For whatever reason, something in these reports resonated with the FBI. The report was taken seriously, investigated, and kept. This fact alone speaks volumes for the existence of UFOs in general and German saucers in particular. So, what can we learn here? Well, obviously, there are reports that back up some of these claims about these craft, right? That they exist. There were certainly different German saucer programs going on. Like many of them are acknowledged, right? There's an actual record. The Meath and the Schriever discs, as they're called, are well recorded. It's a well-known commodity that Schauberger developed what he called a repulsine vortex engine that was allegedly used for some of these craft. There's also the famous case of the Nazi Bell, Die Glocke, which is said to have been a levitation engine of sorts developed by the Nazis for, many of these craft. So, with that being said, I mean, what do we know about some of these craft? Now, there's all kinds of documents that show blueprints for these and different design details that have also been uncovered in some of these files. And to get to some of them, you have to go to other sources, outside sources, to find some more of this information. So we're going to move down here to a portion called the Hanabu Secret Files. The Hanabu Secret Files. Henry Stevens says a Hanabu craft is a large-size flying saucer, at least 30 feet or so in diameter, with a classic dome on its upper side and without any indication of rotating discs, wheels, or parts. It is thought to make a whining sound when starting up, as indicated in the FBI documents described above. Because the craft is electric, there is a glow about it, and at night the craft may be brightly lit, and I'm going to pause for a moment there, folks. Now, many of these characteristics are backed up other places, and if you go back, a couple months ago, I did an episode here where I explored Project Winter Haven, developed by Dr. T. Townsend Brown. That has many of these same characteristics. that these electrical type technologies were what were used for propulsion for a type of craft like this, a disc-shaped craft, which Brown had developed. And this is very much well recorded within the Naval Department. And the development of these craft, these different types of electrogravitic craft, as they were called, went deep black in 1958 with the advent of NASA. So with this being the case, many of these projects went deep underground and were not discussed in public view ever again from that time forward. And still to this day are very heavily covered up. Now, we do see stories of minor leaks coming out from places like Lockheed Skunk Works from, gentlemen like Ben Rich, who has now passed away. He was a former head of Lockheed Skunk Works. Also, there was a gentleman named Boyd Bushman that came out with a lot of information from there. The authenticity of some of this information, I don't know. You have to question some of it. But it seems to me that there is a type of physics that's understood at Lockheed Skunk Works and other places that develop aircraft that is not understood elsewhere, right? This harkens back to the whole idea of ether physics and various models of physics that don't necessarily, stand out in our modern era because we've been taught other ways of thinking, right? But in the auspices of these special access programs, they understand a different type of physics that really truly works here, and a lot of it has to do with electricity and magnetism and things of this nature. So that being the case, it would seem that this fills the bill here. The way that these Nazi craft are described, these Hanabu craft or Vril craft. Now, like I said, there were other saucers that were being developed in Germany. And these are called the Schriever Habermal craft, and the other one is the Meath Beluso craft, if I'm not mistaken. And these were developed as a combined operation between Germany and Italy, right? The Axis powers, the Beluso discs. But these discs were developed, and these were made by, with more standard type aerodynamic technologies. Rather than these exotic technologies. Now the Hanabu and Vril craft, and they also describe one called an Andromeda craft, which is a large cylindrical shaped craft, which would be like a mothership type thing that they have designs for, blueprints and stuff for, that have been seen within some of these different files. Now these are the ones that operate on a more exotic type propulsion system. Allegedly here, right? We can't outright prove all of this, but we do have leaked photographs and blueprints and different design specifications and patents and things like that have come out, and they describe, some of the way that this works. Now, let's get back to the reading here. It would seem that what is starting up are mercury plasma gyros, which are electrified and create a whirling gyroscopic tornado of energy inside sealed globes or spheres. These spheres are indicated in the Hanabu diagrams, as we shall see. The plasma gyros make a whining sound when they first start up, and the electromagnetic field that they generate interferes with other electrical devices in the vicinity, including car and aircraft motors. Indeed, this was essentially what the mysterious Foo Fighters did in the last days of the World War. They interfered with electrical systems of the bombers and forced them to turn back to England. And I'm going to pause there, folks. This is well documented as well, right? So, what they're saying here, there's merit to it. Let's read on. The files and photos describe two types of flying saucer, the Vril, a small two-man craft, and the Hanabu, a larger saucer-shaped craft that had seats for 9 people. A third type of craft is shown, the classic cigar-shaped mothership called the Andromeda. This craft could allegedly hold 1 Hanabu 2 craft and 4 of the smaller Vril craft. These projects were supposedly under the supervision of the Vril Gesellschaft and the SSE-4, a secret development center for alternative energy of the SS, and as such, they were not directly under Hitler's and the Nazi Party's orders and were not really planned for war use. But later, when Germany's situation deteriorated, the SS began to think about using the flying discs in the war. They were originally scout craft. Later, they were used for other purposes. Supposedly, the Vril and Hanabu craft had these statistics. Gonna pause here, folks. So none of this is really verifiable, right? But listen to the descriptions of these craft. And we see actually photographs. I mean, if you're watching this, you could see as the slideshow I'm presenting, a lot of these are the actual leaked photographs and documentation of the existence of these craft. So take a look at them and listen to the descriptions given. So, supposedly, the Vril and Hanabu craft had these statistics. The Vril 1, and this is from September 1944, had a diameter of 11.5 meters. Its drive system, or its engine, was the Schumann levitator, an anti-gravitation equipment of sorts. The steering, it was a mag-field impulsor. Velocity, it could travel 2,900 to 12,000 kilometers per hour. Capacity, 5.5 hours in the air. The Hanabu 1 from December 1944, diameter 25 meters. The drive is called a Thule Tachyonator 7B, another anti-gravitation equipment. So they're claiming that these different types of anti-gravitic engines or electrogravitic engines existed, that the Nazis developed several different types of these. Okay, the steering mechanism is a mag-field impulsor. The velocity of this one was 4,800 to 17,000 kilometers per hour. Its capacity was 18 hours in the air, and its crew was 8 people. The Hanabu 2 from 1943 to 1944. Diameter, 26.3 meters. The drive, or the engine in it, a Thule Tachyonator 7B anti-gravitation equipment. The steering was a mag-field impulsor. Velocity, 6,000 to 21,000 kilometers per hour. Capacity, 55 hours in the air. And crew, 9 people. Hanabu 3 from sometime in 1945. The diameter is said to be 71 meters. Its drive is a Thule Tachyonator 7B and Schumann levitators, both of those being anti-gravitation equipment. The steering mechanism is a mag-field impulsor. Its velocity could travel 7,000 to 40,000 kilometers per hour. Its capacity, it could spend 8 weeks in the air. Crew, 32 people. It is interesting to note in the statistics for the Hanabu that the Vril craft could be in the air for 5.5 hours, while the Hanabu 1 could be in the air for 18 hours. The Hanabu 2 could be in the air for 55 hours, and the Hanabu 3 could be in the air for an astonishing 8 weeks. Clearly, the Hanabu craft needed toilet facilities on them, but the Vril craft had no toilet or other facilities. It was apparently noted in some crashed UFOs that there were no toilet facilities of any kind, which indicated to early military researchers that these were not long-haul craft meant for long missions. Still, the amazing speed of the Vril craft would allow it to go long distances, even in the relatively short time that it could fly. And then there's diagrams here in the book of the different various Vril craft and Hanabu craft. As in all clandestine programs, the names of the devices or craft were ultimately secret, and the odd name Hanabu would have originally been a code word. So, what is the meaning of the code word of Hanabu? And this is coming from David Hatcher Childress, because he actually explored this idea, and I give props to him for exploring the origins of the word Hanabu, right? This is a very important thing. So let's read what he found. I found it very difficult to find out what this word meant. Unlike the term Vril, no explanation of the word Hanabu is given in any of the literature that can be found on the subject. As with many code names, German code names did not necessarily have anything to do with the actual mission, device, or operation itself. This may be the case with the word Hanabu. It may have some arcane meaning that only a few of the inner circle of the Vril Society would know. In looking it up on various dictionaries on the internet, one lead seemed to show that it was a type of hair color. However, the best definition that I was able to find was from Wiktionary.org. Hanabu, plural, Hanabus, Hanabu. Egyptology, plural, Hanabu, a member of a people from the Aegean Sea. Any class of a class of flying saucers supposedly built by the Nazis. So Hanabu originally here, according to etymological sources, comes from a description from Egyptology of members of people from the Aegean Sea. So let's read on here. So does the meaning behind the code word Hanabu refer to the original Greek raiders known to the Egyptians as the Sea Peoples who fought against Egypt circa 1200 BC and were ultimately repelled? These Sea Peoples were depicted as having horned helmets like Vikings, and they overwhelmed coastal Egypt for a period until they were defeated. These people essentially settled in the eastern Mediterranean in what is today Lebanon, Turkey, and Greece. These people were apparently the Hanabu. It has been suspected that the Sea Peoples were from Germany and Scandinavia, and this could fit in with the SS's penchant for using esoteric and raider-type names such as Vril, Werewolf, Death's Head, Stormtrooper, and so on. The SS Death's Head rings, such as the one Himmler wore, are now valuable collector's items and were worn by most of the U-boat officers and other commanders. Another explanation is that Hanabu is a shortened form of Hanaberg. Hanaberg was supposedly the secret facility used by the SS to develop the Vril and Hanabu craft. According to the curious website, the Zervanclub.com, the original name of the craft was the Hanaberg Gerat, or Hanaberg device. It was later shortened to Hanabu, or H. Gerat, says the site. So I'm going to pause there. So there's also some of these sites that are operated ostensibly by secret society groups who are claiming other things about these names. So we don't really know, right, where the name came from. Was this developed in a place called Hanaberg, and that's what Hanabu is short for? It's hard to say. I personally think it's more likely that the esoteric meaning that David Hatcher Childress came across, the Aegean people, from the Egyptologist perspective, is probably a more correct rendering, right? This is the kind of stuff that many of these governments and various secret society groups, they take a lot of this stuff seriously, and they put major importance on naming things. So with that being the case, I think that's probably a more correct rendering of what this is and where it came from. So, with that being said, who knows? Who knows for sure? But according to this site that he's citing from now, what's the name of it here again? Let me find it. Zervanclub.com. Zurvanclub.com. Now, this website claims that, quote, since 1935, the Thule Society had been scouting for a remote, inconspicuous, underdeveloped testing ground for their craft. Thule found a location in northwest Germany that was known as, or possibly designated as, Hanaberg. At the establishment of this testing ground and facilities, the SSE-4 unit simply referred to them as the H. Gerat, the Hanaberg device. For wartime security reasons, the name was shortened to Hanabu. In 1939, it was briefly designated as RFZ-5, along with Vril's machines, once the Hanaberg site was abandoned in favor of a more suitable Vril-Arado-Brandenburg aircraft testing grounds. So I'm going to pause there. So according to this website, which is ostensibly run by people within either the Thule and or Vril societies or the existing members in, associated secret society groups today, that this is the information that they claim. Okay? So this is what they're claiming, and there could be some truth to it, or it could be total nonsense. I don't know, but David Hatcher Childress here is quoting from this website to try to shed a little light on where the name Hanabu comes from and why it's important. So, like I said, I would suspect probably his first venture down, the etymological timeline here is probably a more apt description for how it got its name. But let's listen to what this, secret society group that operates this Zervin Club website says. So this seems to be the origin of the name Hanabu. It is named after the facility it was designed in. The SS often used occult-type names and symbols for their ships and aircraft. Vril, Atlantis, Andromeda, Werewolf, and the Skull and Crossbones, a typical Masonic symbol first used by the Knights Templar when their fleet was outlawed by the Vatican. But with the Hanabu, we have a curious and mundane name for what was one of the most top-secret projects during World War II. And the super-secret nature of the craft meant that it had no name, only the code name H. Gerot, which was used in any communications. Ultimately, plans for the craft had to give the flying saucer a name, and thus it became Hanabu. I must admit this seems to be a correct origin for the word. But we still do not know where this Hanaburg was located, except that it was supposedly in northwest Germany. There is no town or area called Hanaburg that I am able to find. Apparently this was a secret manufacturing site, probably in a rural forested area. A prehistoric hill fort called the Huneberg is located by the river Danube in Hundersingen near Herbertingen in the south of Germany, close to modern borders with Switzerland and Austria. It is considered to be one of the most important early Celtic centers in Central Europe. It is a fortified citadel, and there are extensive remains of settlements and burial areas spanning several centuries. Though it has a similar name, it does not seem that Huneberg is the location for the facility creating the Hanabu. However, maybe this facility, wherever it was, took its name from this ancient site. Okay, folks, so we see here an interesting bit of history, okay? Now, there's evidence to support that these flying discs did exist as far as their performance potential and the technologies that were utilized in making them. We could only speculate as to how this works because we don't really have access to the technical designs, but we could know some things by some people who put some serious time into research of these things. Igor Witkowski being one of them. He heavily researched the whole Nazi Bell project, and many of the things that he had come up with pertaining to this Bell project are being reflected here in the different Hanabu stories, right? The whole idea of a mercury plasma being rotated to create an electrogravitic effect. This is something that kind of crosses over between these two ideas. Now, many people have speculated that this Nazi Bell device was the actual engine, like the propulsion engine. Maybe this was one of these levitators, right? These, what do they call them? Schumann levitators, or one of these other devices. Maybe that's what that was. Maybe it was a prototype of one of these devices, and maybe it's been developed further since then. It's hard to say, right? And we also see how, the Nazis really tried to collect all of the ancient data that they could, all the ancient artifacts and records of various cultures that talked about similar things. Like we've heard the stories of the Vimanas in India. It's the same type thing, and there's speculation that this is where they got the idea for the rotating mercury plasma to create some type of an anti-gravitic effect. So that being the case, is this true? Now, we can't say with 100% certainty that it's true, but we can see that we have pictures, we have blueprints, we have specs, and we have patents and stuff all relating to many of these different types of ideas, a lot of them deriving from German sources. So, where did this information come from? Where did these pictures and stuff come from? The sources that were pushing them forward, they don't seem to be, genuine in what they wanted to do with this. But I don't think they were the official first source of this, especially since there's a lot of corroborating information that's come out from intelligence agencies and from government document dumps and stuff like that, too, that back up some of these ideas. So coming at it from multiple sources, there seems to be a core of truth to some of the ideas that perhaps the Germans had developed some type of a saucer craft, right? And we could see there were actual saucer craft prototypes that they had built that are historically documented that have been shown in the past that used technologies that we are familiar with, more things that we're familiar with, conventional technologies that we have, but this is something more exotic. Okay, so this would be something that would be very heavily classified within military intelligence, I would say. And they're actually saying that the Nazi Party themselves didn't have control of this, that this was a separate secret group, probably the Thule Society or Vril Society, that were developing these things using government monies and funding from the Nazis and the SS and the various research arms of the German government at the time. So this is kind of similar to what goes on today, right? We have corporations, private interest groups that develop these technologies for the government using government funding, and they tuck away these records far from the public scrutiny within secret access programs or special access programs within the black budget community. This is something that looks like it was going on in Germany too, except this was promulgated through different groups like the Thule Society and the Vril Society. And they were developing these craft in secret, outside of the auspices of government oversight, so to say. The government provided the funding and, left them go ahead and do this, and they had very little say. And it looks like they did the compartmentalization thing as has been done today. So people within the different, orders of the different departments or branches of government within the Nazi Party were probably largely unaware of some of these programs, with the exception of possibly some of the ones within, the SS or the Waffen, SS Waffen groups, the different militaristic arm of this that were closely following these technologies. So that being the case, we see similar things go on today. We know that there's secret technologies out there that aren't being disclosed to the public right now. So the same thing could have been going on here, right? But let's continue on here and read a little bit more. Because here's where the rubber meets the road here and where it starts to get interesting. An armed flying gyro. Supposedly, the Hanabu was an armed flying gyro that was first tested in 1939. Some websites claim that working models of the Hanabu were already being built by 1942. According to the Vril websites on the internet that promote the mysterious Maria Orsic and her contact with the planet Aldebaran, we have this curious timeline that includes mention of Operation Paperclip and the secret Antarctica base in New Schwabenland, sometimes called Point 211. Gonna pause right there, folks. So if you're not familiar with some of this Vril-type mythology, so to say, there was a woman during World War II, during this time frame in the 1930s, who was very important to the Vril Society. Her name was Maria Orsic. She was said to be a prophetess of sorts, a messenger. She allegedly was able to communicate with extraterrestrial intelligences and was a type of psychic or a seer of sorts. And she was heavily involved with this Vril Society and was said to get input from these quote-unquote aliens that gave them the secrets to developing some of these technologies. This is what's alleged, and if you're not familiar with the mythology of this, this is who this person was. Her name was Maria Orsic. You could find pictures of her, photos of her. She's had very, very long hair, and this was a very important thing. And you see how all this ties back once again to the occult and the esoteric, and that's largely what a lot of it was about within the Vril Society. So they claim to have gotten the inspiration for these technologies through those contact points from this important individual, and her and others as well. But she was one of the most well-documented ones of these people within the Vril Society that's largely regarded here. But let's continue reading here, and we see how he mentions about her contact with the planet Aldebaran. He also mentions Operation Paperclip, right? So the Vril Society was aware of Operation Paperclip, and they were probably heavily part of that as well, being a secret society group, well connected internationally, I'm sure. And we also see the legend of the Antarctic base that was set up by the Nazis, which there might be something to, let's be honest. But let's read on. In August 1939, the first RFZ-5, which would be the Hanabu, took off. It was an armed flying gyro with the odd name Hanabu-1. It was 25 meters across and carried a crew of 8. At first, it reached a speed of 4,800 kilometers per hour, later up to 17,000 kilometers per hour. It was equipped with two 6-centimeter KSK ray guns in revolving towers and 4 machine guns. It had a 60% space capability. By the end of 1942, the Hanabu 2 was ready. The diameters varied from 26 to 32 meters, and their height from 9 to 11 meters. They carried between 9 and 20 people, had a Thule tachyonator drive, and near the ground reached a speed of 6,000 kilometers per hour. It could fly in space and had a range of 55 flying hours. At this time, there existed already plans for a large capacity craft, the Vril 7, with a diameter of 120 meters. A short while later, the Hanabu 3, the showpiece of all discs, was ready, with 71 meters across. It was filmed flying. It could transport 32 men, could remain airborne for 8 weeks, and reached at least 7,000 kilometers per hour, according to documents in the secret SS archives, up to 40,000 kilometers per hour. And I'm going to pause there, folks. Remember, this information is coming from this website that is allegedly put out by the Vril Society, or the Thule Society, that this is, one of the things they claim, right? So, even though there's evidence that these craft existed, there's no evidence that they flied in space or were capable of flying in space, as is said here. There's, certainly no evidence that they traveled at these high speeds. Although, is it possible? Well, sure it is. Do I know the truth? No. I don't know any more than anybody else. And many of these people have spent countless hours researching this. And this is the information that they've found. And there are some correlating evidences to back up some of the claims. So I don't think, throwing out the baby with the bathwater is a good idea here. I definitely see a line of development that has moved forward from the time of Tesla and some of the things that Tesla has discussed. So, you could see maybe there's something to the way that these things operate. Now, does that mean that we could 100% know for certain that these tachyonator drives that they speak of, or these different devices, these anti-gravitic devices, really truly exist and were built and developed and have probably since been perfected since then? It's hard to say for sure. I do think there's something to the idea that it could potentially work, especially if you, accept a model of physics that's different than what we're taught in the mainstream here, which, the mainstream physicists still haven't figured out a unified theory, and they never will, going down the, the lines of thought that they go now. It's all about plugging in advanced mathematics just to make things mesh together in ways that they normally don't, by introducing, constants and things like that into their equations, and making it work mathematically, but it doesn't actually work in reality, right? It doesn't work through experimentation. This is the opposite of science, of true science. Okay, it's mathematics. That's largely what scientists today do. They do math. That's what a scientist is. It's a mathematician. But let's continue reading here and see what else that these people could, illuminate us on with some of these different ideas. At the beginning of 1943, It was planned to build in the Zeppelin Works a cigar-shaped mothership. The Andromeda device, of a length of 139 meters, should transport several saucer-shaped craft in its body for flights of long duration, and it says in parentheses, interstellar flights. By Christmas 1943, an important meeting of the Vril Gesellschaft took place at the seaside resort of Kohlberg. The two mediums, Maria Orsic and Sigrun, attended. The main item on the agenda was the Aldebaran project. The mediums had received precise information about the habitable planets around the sun of Aldebaran, and one began to plan a trip there. At a January 22, 1944 meeting between Himmler, Kunkel of the Vril Society, and Dr. Schumann, this project was discussed. It was planned to send the Vril 7 large-capacity craft through a dimension channel independent of the speed of light to Aldebaran. According to Rathhofer, a first test flight in the dimension channel took place in the winter of 1944. It barely missed disaster, for photographs show the Vril 7 after the flight looking as if it had been flying for 100 years. The outer skin was looking aged and was damaged in several places. On February 14, 1944, the supersonic helicopter constructed by Schriever and Habermal under the V-7 project that was equipped with 12 turbo units BMW 028 was flown by the test pilot Joachim Rohlek at Peenemünde. The vertical rate of ascent was 800 meters per minute. It reached a height of 24,200 meters, and in horizontal flight a speed of 2,200 kilometers per hour. It could also be driven with unconventional energy. But the helicopter never saw action since Peenemünde was bombed in 1944, and the subsequent move to Prague didn't work out either, because the Americans and the Russians occupied Prague before the flying machines were ready again. And I'm going to pause there, folks. So some of this stuff you have to take with a grain of salt. But however, keep in mind, this Schriever-Habermal project, this is a known commodity. This is historically a proven thing. They did develop these flying discs, and they're calling this flying helicopter. This was using conventional technologies, right? Things that we would consider conventional technologies that we understand. So they built a flying disc craft that was much like a helicopter at Peenemünde, and that's what this was talking about, that was able to achieve these various rates of speed and altitude. So think about that. So let's read on here. In the secret archives of the SS and the British and the Americans discovered during the occupation of Germany at the beginning of 1945, photographs of the Hanabu 2 and the Vril 1 crafts, as well as of the Andromeda device. Let's see. That's all it says. Okay. So I guess they found photographs. Due to President Truman's decision in March 1946, the War Fleet Command of the U.S. gave permission to collect material of the German high-technology experiments. Under the Operation Paperclip, German scientists who had worked in secret were brought to the U.S. privately, among them Victor Schauberger and Werner von Braun. A short summary of the developments that were meant to be produced in series. The first project was led by Professor Dr. M.G.W.O. Schumann of the Technical University Munich. Under his guidance, 17 disc-shaped flying machines with a diameter of 11.5 meters were built, the so-called Vril 1 Jaeger, Vril 1 fighters, that made 84 test flights. At least one Vril 7 and one Vril 7 large-capacity craft apparently started from Brandenburg after the whole test area had been blown up towards Aldebaran with some of the Vril scientists and Vril Lodge members. Gonna pause there. Like I said, folks, some of this stuff you have to take with a grain of salt, right? Because this is coming from a Vril-based website, okay? So these are people within secret society groups that are making these claims that they developed these craft, and it looks like, according to them, that they actually flew one of these Vril 7s to Aldebaran with some of the Vril scientists and lodge members on board. That's what they're claiming here, right? But they're also making some, claims here as far as, different types of test flights and stuff like that, numbers of craft and test flights and stuff like that going on, which seems like pretty specific data. So is there some truth to this? Maybe, right? Because we can see that there is a kind of line of succession to this information and the development of some of these projects. But let's continue on. The second project was run by the SSW Development Group. Until the beginning of 1945, they had 3 different sizes of bell-shaped space gyros built. The Hanabu 1, 25 meters diameter, 2 machines built that made 52 test flights, with a speed calculated to be 4,800 kilometers per hour. The Hanabu 2, a 32-meter diameter, 7 machines built that made 106 test flights, with a speed calculated to be 6,000 kilometers per hour. The Hanabu 2 was already planned for series production. Tenders were asked from the Dornier and Junkers aircraft manufacturers, and at the end of March 1945, the decision was made in favor of Dornier. The official name for the heavy craft was to be the Dostra, the Dornier stratospheric craft. So they came up with an official name for this, from Dornier, the developer. So they were supposedly supposed to mass produce these and call them the Dostra. The Hanabu 3, 71-meter diameter, only 1 machine built that made at least 19 test flights with a calculated speed of 7,000 kilometers per hour. The Andromeda device existed on the drawing board. It was 139 meters long and had hangars for 1 Hanabu 2, 2 Vril 1s, and 2 Vril 2s. So we see here there's some diagrams and stuff like that. And there's documents here, it says, showing that the Vril 7 large capacity craft was used for secret, still earthbound missions after it was finished and test flown by the end of 1944. A landing at the Mondsee in the Schallkammer group in Austria with dives to test the pressure resistance of the hull. Probably in March and April 1945, the Vril 7 was stationed in the Alpenfestung, the Alpine Forest, for security and strategic reasons, from whence it flew to Spain to get important personalities who had fled there safely to South America and New Schwabenland to the secret bases erected during the war. And then there's also diagrams of this Andromeda craft here. From this fascinating list of craft and their statistics, and information coming from the 1989 document dump in Britain that included all of the diagrams that we are seeing, we can gather that at the end of the war, there were, and now here's where the rubber meets the road. This is what's claimed to have existed, right? These are what is said to have existed. There were allegedly 17 Vril Jaeger 1 craft, which were the Vril fighters with, a seated crew of 1. There were 2 Vril 7s with an unknown amount of crew, 2 Hanabu 1s, 7 Hanabu 2s. The Hanabu 2 seated 9 people, crew members, and can hold up to 20 people. 1 Hanabu 3. The Hanabu 3 seated 32 people, and allegedly 2 of the Andromeda craft or device were developed. So this is what's claimed. This is claimed to be the number of these devices, these ships that were built, right? So we have 17 Vril 1s, 2 Vril 7s, 2 Hanabu 1s, 7 Hanabu 2s, 1 Hanabu 3, and 2 of the alleged Andromeda craft, which are the cylindrical-shaped craft. So this is what is claimed to have been developed here. So let's read on here. And we're almost finished, folks. We'll wrap up here very soon. I just wanted to touch upon some of these ideas because I find it fascinating, really. This is always a subject that's interested me, right? So I see a developmental line, a developmental lineage here of man-made disc-shaped craft and UFO-type craft, right? So we see that this has been going on for a long time, that many of these types of concepts have been explored for a long time, and people took them seriously. And these document dumps that came out are kind of showing some evidence that maybe there's something to this. Like I said, some of this you have to take with a grain of salt, but I especially find a lot of these photographs that came from this document dump very compelling. because it was so much harder to fake these kinds of photographs back then, right? And we're talking this document dump. Much of it came out with much of these photos in 1989, right? And think back, many of these photos were examined and were shown to, be from the time period of the 1940s and 1950s and times like that when they're claimed to be from. So when you look at these, it's much more difficult to fake these types of photographs in the modern era. Well, it was then than it is in the modern era, we should say. So with that being the case, I find the photographic evidence compelling, and I find, some of the patents and designs and diagrams and stuff like that compelling as well. So, you could see, and when you follow the line of thought and look at the more well-known types of development that had gone on historically that can be proven, things like the Schriever Meath discs and the all of these things that have been built, the Schauberger work, all of this stuff are known commodities, right? Then you could understand that maybe there's something more that goes along with this, and we see a lot of the evidence pointing to the fact that yes, there are unknown things that have been spotted. Especially going back to the classic UFO flaps of the 1950s, especially like 1952, and different times like that. And many of the descriptions given match these to a T, don't they? So, it's a much more feasible scenario that these are man-made craft. So to say, rather than say something extraterrestrial that we're seeing when you line up the timeline for this stuff with that. So anyway, let's read on, and we're almost finished here. We'll wrap up here very soon. The Andromeda craft, called a device in the vril material on the internet, was said to be a 139-meter-long tubular craft that, according to plans released, held one Hanabu 2 and 2 vril craft. The above text says that there were 4 vril craft in the Andromeda mothership, so there is a discrepancy here. We know that the crew of a Hanabu 2 was up to 9 people, and then it could ultimately hold 20 people, but we do not know what the crew of the Andromeda craft would be. We might surmise by calculating in this way: a crew of 9 for the Hanabu 2, and another 4 crew members for the smaller vril craft. If there was another 20 possible crew members, we get a figure of 33 crew members. So, that's an interesting fact in and of itself, because they love their double-digit numbers, don't they? Numbers like 33, 22. All of these things are important to secret society groups. So, maybe this is, just something encoded, or maybe there's more to it than that. Who knows? This is an interesting number for a secret society of Teutonic Knights who believed that they were fighting a world war against an English-French Masonic society who believed that they were descended from the Knights Templar. The Templars, after their suppression, founded the first modern banks and courts at the Old Bailey in London's Old City. The underground stop here is Temple, and the original circular Temple Church in London can be found here as well. The Teutonic Knights were a third branch of the Crusaders, with the Knights of St. John and the Knights Templar being the other 2 branches. The Nazi SS fancied themselves as the reincarnations of the Teutonic Knights of old, a group that was allied with the British, French, and Templars, but ultimately opposed to the Russians and other Slavic forces. Gonna pause there. This is an interesting bit of fact that's been included here by David Hatcher Childress. It was an important concept, right? This is an important concept to keep in mind here, because it always falls back to a lot of these esoteric lines of thought. And these people that control many of these projects, they do see themselves as being, special in many ways. They see themselves as having the divine right to do this stuff and to be the arbiters of these types of technologies, per se. So let's continue on here, like I said, and we'll wrap it up here very soon. In many ways, World War II was about secret societies fighting for control of the world in the 1930s and 1940s. There was still time for the Germans and Japanese and their allies to grab more control of the world, and the Thule Society, the Vril Society, and the SS all preached the message of an expansive Germany, a Germany that was all over the world, like the British Empire. But their nemesis was the British Empire, a Masonic Templar establishment that had its own secret societies. It is important to remember that secret societies like the Masons, Knights of Columbus, and many others were all the rage until television came along in the 1940s and 50s. The British were actually seen by Hess and other members of the Thule Society as allies, not enemies. However, Churchill and the British military would not negotiate on any terms with Hitler's regime. We will see that Hitler, the Nazis, and the SS did not consider Britain, France, and the West as their enemies, merely as their adversaries. The real goal of the Germans was to push eastward into Russia and the Ukraine, and to capture the oil fields at Baku in Azerbaijan. We will discuss this later in the book. He says here, Germany did not have any oil fields of its own and was constantly looking for sources of energy. This is why the electrical craft predicted by Nikola Tesla were of such interest to the Germans. They needed aircraft and other equipment that did not use petroleum products as their main source of power. Thus, the intensified research into electric spacecraft. Tesla had provided the platform, and the Germans used their money and technology to build the first of what could be described as Tesla craft. And we're going to wrap it up right there, folks. So, essentially, these ideas were derived from Tesla's patents, Tesla's ideas. Tesla developed a machine he called the flivver. Okay, this was something that he had on the drawing board. I don't know if he ever actually built or tested this device, but essentially it was just a flying machine. That's all it did. It was a box. It was, a tubular-shaped device that was able to levitate and fly through the air without any moving parts, using only electricity and the electrical field. This is something that, Tesla was alleged to have been working on. It's something he talked about, actually, in different publications. I have an older magazine that was from, I think, 1917 or 18, something like that, where he's actually talking about this device and how it will operate with no moving parts, and it will fly without, any type of need for something as archaic as lift and propulsion in the sense of an airplane. So he was talking about something like this. So Tesla came up with the ideas and the technologies and experimented with many of these things. And it looks to me like this clear line of succession through, the 1920s into the 1930s and on forward by some various scientists looking into the electrical theory of things, had found a way to perhaps build a propulsion device that works in an electrogravitic type fashion. And we see the echoes of this. And as we've discussed in the past, by looking at the works of Dr. T. Townsend Brown and his project Winter Haven, we see that there might be some legs to this idea. So we also see that perhaps there's legs to the Nazi saucer idea, especially as it pertains to, these special types of saucers that we were alluding to here as we're talking. The Hanabu craft, the Vril craft, the Andromeda craft, all these things were alleged to have been developed. And, we do have these documents and these photographs to back up that might be the case, that these things were real devices that really worked. Now, did they fly to space? I highly doubt it. But did they fly? Probably. And we have the more conventional type saucer craft that are historically documented and provable that the Nazis had developed. So, was this a red herring thrown out there to throw people off the trail of the real developments in the electrogravitic technologies? Perhaps, because we see something similar went on here in the U.S. and Canada in later decades, in the 1960s. Canada actually using some of the ideas, and I think it was either Meath or Schriever. I think it was Schriever from the Nazi camp here, working on the Nazi discs, was involved in this project with a company called Avro in Canada that developed what they called the Avro car. That they put out there for public consumption, and they showed this awkward-looking flying disc thing that was based upon hovercraft-type technology that was really wonky-looking. And they put that out there for the public and saying, yes, this is what we tried developing these flying discs, and this is as good as we could do, and this kind of thing. So they put that out there as public misinformation to lead people off the trail, when in reality, this Avro company was developing a project called Project Silverbug. Which was a Mach 3 flying disc, okay? A flying disc purported to be able to travel at speeds up to Mach 3. So this is a real project, and there were different developments of this project, Silverbug. And there were other Avro projects. One is actually shaped much like, kind of like a half disc with a flat back end, which looks much like some of the early developments from Schriever, in the Nazi discs, right? So you could see the connections here, and he was alleged to have worked with Avro on some of these designs. And not coincidentally, this is also the same shape that we see in a photograph from the famous Roswell event. Okay, this is actually, it's called the Rhodes photograph. It was published in the Roswell local paper on July 9th, 1947. And it shows this strange-looking black partial disc-shaped device with a flat backside and a white light in the center. And this is what it shows. It was published actually in the newspaper. And this is said to be, by some researchers, what the actual crash at Roswell was, this device. And it looks just like a later development from this Avro company. Based upon the Schriever models from the Nazis. So with that being the case, and I think that that picture is actually circulating here in the slideshow. If you watch for it, it should be coming up here soon on the screen. So watch for that picture, and you'll see what I'm talking about with this Rhodes photograph. So there's this connection here that perhaps all of these different things were of more earthly origins than what the government story would have you to believe. And it's largely been acknowledged by the intelligence groups that they use this misinformation and disinformation about extraterrestrial nature of craft like this to lead people astray. They've weaponized it, right? This gives them a perfect cover, doesn't it? It gives them plausible deniability. No, it's not anything we're working on. We don't know what it is. It might be extraterrestrial. It keeps people off the trail. That's what it's designed to do. But you could see there's a clear delineation of development from Tesla on forward through the 1920s and 30s with the developments from guys like T. Townsend Brown and several others, Schriever, Meath, Schauberger. All of these guys were allegedly developing these levitation technologies. So that being the case, who's to say, right? And like I said, some of this stuff you have to take with a grain of salt because if there is some truth in the mix here, it's probably laced with a lot of heavy disinformation as well. So, any of these stories of them flying these disc craft or Andromeda cylindrical-shaped craft off to Aldebaran to meet the aliens or whatever, this is probably disingenuous. But I would suspect that something was developed with these technologies by the Nazis. And what it is exactly, who could say for sure? But I do think there's something to the field of electrogravitics, which went deep black in the late 1950s. This was something that was a known commodity in the public sector in many of the science magazines and publications of the time. It's something that was being discussed and talked about openly in the 1950s. But like I said, it went deep black in 1957 or 58 with the advent and the rise of NASA. And when Dr. T. Townsend Brown went to the Naval Department with his Project Winter Haven proposal, that's when everything went underground. I think it is when the military realized that, hey, people are going to be catching on to this soon. You have these private scientists and stuff like that, like Townsend Brown, who figured out how a lot of this stuff works. And we're really onto something with this. And you have probably these Nazi scientists that were working in these projects, these real society, Thule Society scientists working on these different projects separately. We're coming up with some of the same types of technologies. So I think this was a real eye-opening thing for the military-industrial complex when Townsend Brown, who, by the way, was one of the main contractors with the military, this guy was military through and through, when he independently developed some of these technologies, they probably figured, you know what, there's a lot of smart people out there. We need to keep this under wraps. Let's make this disappear out of the public sight because they're getting close to developing this. So the military has to keep tabs on this. And I think these technologies still exist to this day and are probably much more advanced now than they were back then. But they're hidden within special access programs and, within the auspices of the black budget of the military-industrial complex. And I don't think they're coming to light for the public consumption anytime soon because this involves free energy of sorts, right? The development of free energy technologies, they can't have that. That would cause a catastrophic collapse of society as we know it if they were to release these free energy technologies to the public. If people found out about this, there would be hell to pay, right? Because we're largely based upon these petroleum economies for the most part. And that's what it's all about. It's always these same people. This is how they make their fortune and maintain their control of this place, is through the use of these money systems that are generated from petroleum-based products and things of that nature. That's why, gas prices right now are such a huge thing, right? Because we need it in order for everything to function, because these are the technologies that have been mainstreamed and given to the public. Now, if they were to introduce free energy devices that could develop power for you without consuming any types of fossil fuels or anything like that, all you got to do is plug this device into your house and turn it on, and it'll provide you with free energy for eternity. This is something they can't have going on. It would crash society as we know it. And many of these types of electrogravitic craft ideas and stuff like that are based upon the same types of technologies, because this also leads to the thought process that they would have to admit that the model of physics that they've been telling us and teaching us for the past several decades is totally wrong, and they need to go back to the ether model of physics. And in so doing, this would be another hugely problematic thing for the power structure or the powers that be. So at the end of the day, why would they keep these technologies hidden? Well, that's precisely why, so that these people who run things in this place could maintain control here. Because if you let a cat like this out of the bag, then, it's world shaking, isn't it? Your average person could have so much more potentiality to do the things they want and wouldn't be dependent upon, this small elite group to run things, would they? If we had access to all kinds of free energy? Anyway, that's the bottom line here. It's about suppressing the idea of free energy and suppressing that these technologies exist because it could change the way the world operates. And although it could change the way the world operates for better, there's people in positions of power that don't want that because they want to maintain their control in this place. They want to maintain their level of power in this place. And they don't want to let go of that. So with that being said, I don't think it's likely that we'll see the public revealing of these types of technologies anytime soon. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But I do think these technologies exist at some level or another. And, it's all a matter of time before it truly gets figured out, right? Here within the public sector. Because you could only keep something like this under wraps for so long before somebody in the private world out here figures out how it works. And I think that there were some that have figured out how these things work and have, been silenced about it in many different ways. So that being the case, I always find this topic fascinating, and I didn't want to let the 75th anniversary of Roswell go by without discussing some type of UFO type of technology or type of a program here. So I think this fills the bill nicely, and I really enjoy looking into and delving into this type of research. This is a field that I've always been interested in. UFOs, it's fascinated me. How do these things fly, right? I've seen a couple. I've seen a couple UFOs in my lifetime. Inexplicable things I could not explain, and it doesn't align with the modern field of physics we're handed. So that being the case, I've always delved heavily into this subject and try to find everything that I possibly can relating to it. And I find some of this stuff very fascinating, especially when you go back to sources like Henry Stevens, who, actually explored these topics for decades and talked to very many people and went through and did the actual groundbreaking research into this stuff and talked to these people that allegedly worked on these projects and learned some things and was able to put information forward. So it's thanks to people like that we have access to some of this information. So I just wanted to put that out there because I don't see an awful lot of people out there doing this type of show anymore. I don't know if I've ever really have. I see people out there talking about UFOs. Well, it might be aliens, it might be this, it might be that. But I don't see anybody actually going back and trying to look at the nuts and bolts of things in this type of a forum here, right? In this type of a format. I see people have written books about it, but nobody really goes on podcasts or anything like that and really talks in this kind of a depth about these things or explores these ideas. So I just wanted to do so because I find it fascinating. So if anybody has recommendations out there of anybody that is talking about this type of stuff, please let me know. But I'm going to end it right here for tonight, folks. I think I've gone way over time, and it is a fascinating topic. So, I did enjoy streaming this one, and I'm just going to let it go right there. Everybody have a good night. We'll catch you next time. Have a good one. Introducing the new home for free speech, Free World FM, the alternative to the alternative. Keep on talking in the free world. That's freeworld.fm. Coming soon.